So intent was Frank upon solving the puzzle of Le Marchand's box that he didn't hear the great bell begin to ring. The device had been constructed by a master craftsman, and the riddle was this: that though he'd been told the box contained wonders, there simply seemed to be no way into it. No clue on any of its 6 black lacquered faces as to the whereabouts of the pressure points that would disengage one piece of this 3-dimensional jigsaw from another. Frank had seen similar puzzles, mostly in Hong Kong, products of the Chinese taste for making metaphysics of hard wood. But to the acuity and technical genius of the Chinese, the Frenchman had brought perverse logic that was entirely his own. If there was a system to the puzzle, Frank had failed to find it. Only after several hours of trial and error did a chance juxtaposition of thumbs, middle and last fingers bear fruit. An almost imperceptible click, and then victory. A segment of the box slid out from beside its neighbors. There were 2 revelations. The first, that the interior surfaces were brilliantly polished. Frank's reflection, distorted, fragmented, skated across the lacquer. The second, that Le Marchand, who had been in his time a maker of singing birds, had constructed the box so that opening it tripped a musical mechanism, which began to tinkle a short rondo of sublime banality. Encouraged by his success, Frank proceeded to work on the box more feverishly, quickly finding fresh alignments of fluted slot and oiled peg, which in their turn revealed further intricacies. And with each solution, each new half twist or pull, a further melodic element was brought into play. The tune counterpointed and developed until the initial caprice was all but lost in ornamentation. At some point in his labours, the bell had begun to ring, a steady, sombre tolling. He had not heard it, at least not consciously, but when the puzzle was almost finished, the mirrored innards of the box unknitted, he became aware that his stomach churned so violently at the sound of the bell it might have been ringing half a lifetime. He looked up from his work. For a few moments he supposed the noise to be coming from somewhere in the street outside, but he rapidly dismissed that notion. It had been almost midnight before he'd begun to work at the bird-maker's box. Several hours had gone by. Hours he would not have remembered passing but for the evidence of his watch since then. There was no church in the city, however desperate for adherents, that would ring a summoning bell at such an hour. No, the sound was coming from somewhere much more distant, through the very door, as yet invisible, which Le Marchand's miraculous box had been constructed to open. Everything that Kershaw, who had sold him the box, had promised of it was true. He was on the threshold of a new world, a province infinitely far from the room in which he sat, infinitely far, yet now suddenly near. Most of you already know this story. Most of you know it, even if you haven't read the book. This is The Hellbound Heart by Clive Barker. This is, I believe, the first thing that Barker ever published. It's certainly the first thing he ever wrote. Most of you know it because you've seen the film. It is Hellraiser. This is the original book from which Hellraiser is adapted, the original story, which Barker wrote, I understand, when he was obscenely young. He was, I think, around my age when he wrote The Hellbound Heart. I believe, reading his biography, he was sort of 29, 30, around that age. The Books of Blood, which are often attributed as being his first works, actually came a little bit later, when he was my age. When he was, they were published when he was 32. As you can no doubt tell from that initial reading, it is, as you'd expect from someone so young, quite a naive piece of work. There's a rawness and a sort of lack of refinement to the prose, but at the same time you have the first spurts of what will become Barker's very, very particular style, that strange mix of the poignant and the ornamented. It's a very, very, very particular style that he takes to another level in the Books of Blood, and then later in the likes of Weave World, the Damnation game, and which develops and develops and develops, arguably to an apex in the likes of Sacrament and Imagica. Um, this this is it's something I haven't read for a very long time, a very, very long time. Considering that this is the beginning of Barker's career, and recently the Scarlet Gospels were published, which is in many respects sort of an end to this mythology. Some might even argue an end to Barker's career. I mean, it's the Scarlet Gospels, as you will see at the end of this series, is an interesting piece of work. We'll talk a little bit more about it later, particularly the manner in which it was received and which it is still received. But more on that a little bit later. This is a video, this is going to be a series of videos inspired by Jay Wilburn and a number of others. Jay is an author who I met as a result of my experiences in independent publishing. Jay is absolutely prolific. He writes just insane amounts of work every day. And has a number of works out there. You can find Jay's work down there in the crotch bar, the fellatio bar, whatever you want to call it, down there. There'll be a link to Jay's website and the work that you can buy. What Jay is currently doing, and I'll link to the video as well, Jay, along with a number of other writers and authors, are reading through all of Stephen King's works from the very first to the most recent, which, by the way, you are insane. There's so much. It's going to take you at least a year, I would have thought, to get through all of that. What I thought I'd do is sort of jump on the bandwagon and use it as a springboard to get back into YouTube as well. I've been wanting to do so for a very long time. And also sort of as a way of almost celebrating or anticipating my next published work, which is going to be something I've been working on with Nick Hardy, which some of you will know from my Transformers-related videos, which may actually be making a return at some point relatively soon. I may be getting back into it. We will see. Nick and I have been working on a joint project called Born in Blood. And Born in Blood will eventually consist of a number of volumes. Nick is currently working on visual volumes, his photographs, which are fantastic, by the way. You will be able to see examples of the work that Nick has produced, again, down in the fellatio bar. There will be a link to our website, which Nick set up, Strange Playgrounds, www.strangeplaygrounds.com, which has a consistent blog. It's updated with articles and short stories and things that I've written, and it will also feature these videos now. If you'd like to keep up with that, please feel free. Please comment if there's anything you'd like to say about the stories, about the articles. Please do. All input always welcome. But you'll also find examples there of the photographs that Nick has produced, which are absolutely sublime. They are wonderful. They're distressing. They're gory. They're graphic. They are absolutely wonderful. And what I've done on my side is written short stories inspired by those photographs. Nick's volumes, the visual volumes of Born in Blood, are going to consist of the photographs alongside extracts of the short stories that he himself has selected and has cobbled together into it's a wonderful thing. He showed me it recently. I didn't realize it myself, but he has taken extracts from each of my short stories and put them together into a kind of meta-narrative. So they form this abstract, slightly strange story in and of themselves. So the visual volumes will have their own story, which will act almost as a cipher for unlocking the themes and the consistent messages and imagery of the volume of short stories. which I hope to get published relatively soon once I get the damn thing finished. It's in the process of being refined right now, which will have the complete short stories in it. Um, so it seems like a good time to be doing something like this. So that will hopefully be out relatively soon. There will be samples of it at this year's TF Nation, which both I and Nick will be at. Well, Nick will obviously be attending because he's helping to run a lot of it. You know, he's putting a lot of it together. But what I'm going to do is read through all of Clive Barker's work, from the earliest, which is this, right through to the latest, which is the Scarlet Gospels. And I'm going to be presenting videos on my experience of the work. I mean, I've read all of Barker's work multiple times, including the Scarlet Gospels. I've read the Scarlet Gospels 3 times now. Books like Weave World, I don't know how many times I've read it. It must be well over 12. Well over 12 times. It may even be approaching 20. Same for Imagica, same for the books of the art, same for Galilee, same for Sacrament, which is probably my favourite of Barker's work. I'm going to be presenting a video like this one where I talk about what the work is, how I came across it, and what my initial impressions of it are, and then I'm going to do a follow-up video for each work as well, which will explore my reactions to it, I suppose, because it's something I've had little arguments with my brother about regularly, because my brother's not a reader. I remember when we were kids, I used to read books multiple times. My brother used to say, "Well, why do you do that? Does it change?" And I said, "Well, yes, they do. Books do change when you read them because you change. As you change, you perceive different things, you interpret them differently, you see different resonances and different significance in what you read. You actually begin to appreciate them more, I find. Work becomes deeper and more resonant the more you read it, depending upon your experiences. But yes, the Hellbound Heart, Hellraiser as it became, it's, as I said before, kind of a naive work. It's more of an historical artifact in many respects. This is the beginning of Barker's writing, and as such is very naive, very raw and unusual. The prose is not as precise or as polished as it later becomes, and it's very florid, very experimental. There's a feeling of Barker sort of testing out his own modes of expression in this book, finding his feet, which is wonderful. It's actually really interesting to read. It is removed from the film version in a number of key respects, although as adaptations go, Hellraiser is actually very close to this, which you would expect with Barker as the writer of the script and as the director of the film. There are a number of key differences. The most notable one is Kirsty. Kirsty in the films as the protagonist is actually Larry's daughter, which adds a degree of sort of familial resonance and subject matter to the film. In this, she's just a family friend. It's not quite as complex, interestingly. The film adds layers of domestic subtext that are actually not necessarily present in the book. And I think that's very deliberate. It adds a nice frisson to the thing. It's a nice contrast, the sort of domestic drama, the almost incestuous love triangle that exists between Kirsty, Julia, and Larry. And I suppose it's a love square because you've got Frank as well. Is interesting. It's a nice domestic contrast to the surreal and abstract and horrific world of the Cenobites. Speaking of the Cenobites, they're different entities in this. They're very different entities in this. They're not as specific as they are in the film. In the film, because they're presented visually, they're very particular. There are very particular figures amongst them. They're much more intense in the film than they are in the book. In the book, when they appear, just after that extract that I read, they are these fey, slightly disinterested creatures. They're bored. That's what you get from the Cenobites in the book. They're bored. They're not that interested in Frank. Frank calls them and they sort of sigh and they go, what do you want? Really? They don't immediately, the hooks and chains don't immediately just sort of burst out of the box or out of the shadows and just rip him apart. They come to him and they ask him what he wants. They're sort of like, what? God, why did you call us? We're not that interested in you, to be quite frank. You're not very interesting. And what Frank asks them for is pleasure. That's all. That's the word. That is his answer, and they give it to him. They give him a form of pleasure that he has never imagined, which is the problem. Their definition of pleasure is far removed from his, because they have experienced things that he can never conceive of. Pleasure for them is not just as he imagines. It points out in the book. He imagines that they're going to come with women, with sort of like machines to help him get off. Essentially, that's not it. That's not what they do. They alter the condition of his nerve endings so that everything, even the slightest of experiences, is orgasmic and agonizing. And then they come with the chains, the hooks, the surgical implements. So you can imagine what that experience is like. They are bizarrely attractive in this and in the film, which is part of the story's power. It's why it's sustained. What they offer is strangely attractive. Um, they offer an experience that is carnal and metaphysical at once, which again it encapsulates the beginnings of the themes and the subjects that obsess Barker throughout his work. It begins carnal and goes to a point of such extremity that you're torn apart both physically and abstractly. Your personality is torn to shreds and you are put back together. You learn how to operate in different contexts, to perceive and define things differently. You become like them. You become these explorers, as Pinhead himself puts it in the film, explorers in the further regions of experience. And that is what is attractive about them and about the box. And we know it's attractive because they exist. The Cenobites are obviously people who went looking for this experience, as is Frank. And that's part of their power. It's why the Image and the franchise has sustained in all of its heinous condition at the moment, throughout the decades. It's why it still has a certain degree of power. It's going to be interesting diving back into this, because this is one of Barker's stories I'm not as familiar with. It's one I haven't read as much as some of the others. So there will be a follow-up once I finish reading it, in which I'll give my new opinions and my newly formulated impression. If you'd like to join me, then please go find a copy, go and read it, and then we'll come back and discuss it. That could be really fun. Until then, as I say, links below, lots of links below to Strange Playgrounds, to Born in Blood, to Jay Wilburn's stuff. I hope you enjoy.